Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another speaker forum from Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival. Glad you could join us. My name is Kenneth Wong. I'm a Burmese American writer, author, blogger, and language instructor. I'm also going to be the moderator for this live discussion. So today we are talking about ethnic nationalities and the Rohingya, a search for justice and peace. Let's go ahead and meet our panelists for today. Our first panelist is San Nsang. San, would you mind telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what organization you represent? And if you don't mind, could you do in English and also in your mother tongue, please?
I'll start with my mother tongue. That's Kachin Alliance.
Very good.
When I'm in Nsang Ngare, Yako Kachin Alliance, did Kampuna Abungi, did Latona, World Kachin Congress at Ningbokuna Mung, Bungi, Loto Korea, Yapotning Tanai, I won't bong Yusa, Ranwan Mung Sakinrat Punga, spokesperson Kuna Mung, did Lato Korea. That's in Jingpo. And in English, San Nsang with Kachin Alliance, and also heads the World Kachin Congress, which is a member of KPIC, which is the Kachin Political Interim Coordination Team. And I serve as a secretary and a spokesperson. And one of our members, actually 4 of our members currently serve in national unity government, including the vice president position. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So glad that you can join us. My second panelist is Yasmin. Yasmin, welcome. I'd also like to ask you to do the same thing. Would you mind introducing yourself in English and your native language, please?
Sure. I'm Yasmin. I Rohingya activist maze involved korite sarbasoroye toy arar halat arar zulum intin awareness suribala toy advocate koriteri toy yan hokmutoloy aro public loy aro hare gorifarir ham kumala ay yan goriteri. And I'm going to do it in English now. My name is Yasmin. I am a Rohingya social justice activist. I have been involved in advocating for the community for about 4 years. It started back in 2017 when the clearance operation happened and my own family was affected. And that sort of became the turning point where I became involved with activist groups across Canada. And we formed the organization called Rohingya Human Rights Network. And I was working with them for about 3 years until last year when I left. Apart from that, I've also been involved in raising awareness and trying to connect with various different governments around the world, as well as raising public awareness here in Canada as much as I can through the work with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights to create an exhibition called Time to Act Rohingya Voices. And that is the photo gallery with Kevin Freyer's photos of Exodus in 2017. And then, excuse me, and then some of those work also turned into oral history to preserve some of the history, some of the journeys of the people who are now part of the Rohingya Canadian community, and it is made into a national archive to showcase that Rohingya are now part of the Canadian fabric of the society. And that exhibition unfortunately have ended, but the work continues, and I've also been involved in creating this learning tool for for high school students, and this is a curriculum across Canada where they learn about Holocaust, where it compares to other mass atrocity, and the tool is called Us versus Them, and you can access that with on the website of the Montreal Holocaust Museum. So apart from that, I've sort of been a little bit involved in creating and working to build alliances with young people from Myanmar, specifically those who are from ethnic communities. So that is, there's a lot of work to do, but probably not enough time to go into. And I'm a very, very small percentage, very, very small part of this. Thank you.
Well, we have 1 hour, so we'll come back to your work a little bit later in the program. But right now, I want to go back to Gumsan. I want to start with you because when I was growing up, when I was going to school, of course, we were taught that there are 8 major ethnic races, and then the maybe 130 plus ethnic groups, but I just come to realize that the reality is probably much more complex than that. Why don't you tell us specifically about Kachin? When you hear the word, what comes to your mind? What kind of food, what kind of culture, what kind of event? What do you imagine as characteristics that you think of as Kachin people?
And so thanks for the question. So over the Memorial Day, I've been reading about our people's contribution to the liberation of modern day Burma, meaning 25,000 Kachins were recruited into the US Army and US Allied forces, and they helped liberate the country. And I've been going through the geography of the country as well. Went to the Library of Congress and looked at the map of Burma in 1800s and 1700s. So the so-called the Kachin state that we now call were all labeled, even the US Congress maps, as a independent tribal territories. So anything that's north of Kingdom of Ava were recognized as an independent people, independent territories. So when I think about my people, we're absolutely feel very independent in spirit, very liberated as well. And so there's a very strong sense of liberation in our hearts, but we understand in 1947, our forefathers forged a union where all of us are to be recognized as same people, meaning equal status for all. And we co-founded this union as one people, one united people, where we're not where we would be treated not upon on our creed, but just to be a citizen of this nation. So we're more of a closer to be honest, to Tibet than even to the Burmans. But we understand this coming together sentiment of the nation. So when you say Kachin, to me, definitely mountainous, very liberated, and also very jovial kind of people as well, and communal, very communal driven. And we're religiously a minority in the country as well.
Oh, could you clarify that a little bit? When you said religiously a minority, what do you mean by that? The majority, for the majority of the Kachin people, there would be? So
we are over 95% Christians. Okay. We believe in a very predominantly Buddhist society. It's not only Buddhist, but we are 1 billion people right east of us. That's China. That's 1 billion. And Hinduism is over 1 billion of Hindus right west of us. And we're about 100-mile span between those two great powers and those two very dominant religions as well.
I understand. Thank you very much. Now, Yasmin, I also want to ask you the same thing. When you say Rohingya, what does the culture comprises? What does it mean for you in terms of the kind of practices or events that you would associate with your distinct culture, your people?
So a lot of people don't know this, but Rohingya were very crucial part and parcel of Burmese society from the very get-go, from the time immemorial, from the independence history, when Myanmar was Burma at that point was trying to gain independence. Rohingya were actually part of who or how that came about. And without the help, without the assistant that we brought into the process, there would be less stability, and perhaps it might not have been possible. So people don't quite understand that before erasure that comes with the first coup, and the first attempt to actually first dispossess the lands and resources from the people all across Myanmar, but it started and it exacerbated itself in the Rakhine state, and it sort of spread it out all throughout the ethnic regions. Those were the attempts to actually disempower not just Rohingya, but ethnic people all across the board. And those were done not to just drive out people, not out of pure hatred. It is extremely tied to economic interest that we see today. And that's why the economic interest became the lifeline of the Tatmadaw and how it became so powerful within this country. Now, before all of that happened, Rohingya were actually quite a vibrant society. Men and women used to actually participate in the political, economic, and all other aspects of life within the community. And I'm mentioning the gender parity or the aspects of that because we don't see enough of that nowadays. When you actually go and look online, just type Google Rohingya women, you would always just see Rohingya women as depicted as someone who's crying, someone who's exhausted, someone carrying her baby, or someone who's like in full cloth veil. And to mention that that was very far from where we started out is really not even beginning to cover what had happened to us. So all of these years that the Tatmadaw has tried to grip the community with fear and destabilizing the community bit by bit, it all had to do with disempowering and make sure that the community is destabilized in a way that there is mistrust sown within the community, deep within the using the sexual and gender-based violence as a tool to oppress and further ensure that the community can no longer come back together. And so we have not only the loss of language, the loss of culture, but we also have the loss of trust that is needed within the community in order for it to flourish. So our community actually speaks a language called Rohingya, just as we call ourselves Rohingya. And the word Rohingya itself is actually derivative of a word that was used long ago to actually describe or call the Rakhine state, which is called back in the days Raham or Rohang, something along that line. And throughout all of those years, the changes, there were many instances where the British colonialist forces or the travelers or doctors that came from to accompany different companies that come to the region have actually recorded some of those things and actually depicted Rohingya as a group of people back in the late 1600 to early 1700, especially one who's called Francis Buchanan. And he was actually writing down and recording a lot of geological features, documenting places and people and what language they speak. And if you actually go to look at his some of his writings, he went back to Britain like not too long after, and a few years later, he actually wrote it down and published it. And some of those things have to do with the language of different people in different regions. And one language was Rohingya, which, you know, is made mostly of Pali and Sanskrit. So there's so much connection that is lost between Rakhine language, Rohingya language, and the languages that is within Rakhine state that connects to other parts of Myanmar. But we don't see a lot of that now because genocide have taken the toll on the community, so much so that the only narratives that we see nowadays are just about people dying, people hurting, and we don't really get to see the other side of Rohingya, which is a very human side. And perhaps, you know, when we bring about more awareness and more understanding of who Rohingya are and how much we've contributed to Myanmar as a society, we would then be able to understand that these are not just a group of people who are just waiting to, you know, as victims to be helped, but they were really actively involved in trying to liberate themselves, but they were just, you know, crippled by various different attacks that have happened over the years in order to disempower them. So if you can take anything away from this event, I would say, you know, do your research, and Francis Buchanan is a really great start in learning about Rohingya history, but actually follow, you know, Rohingya person, Rohingya activist in reaching out to them and trying to connect with them about any cultural aspect that you want to know from us. And we would be able to hopefully help you understand a little bit better, apart from the, you know, the heart-wrenching news stories that you would see every single day, because that's desensitizing in a way, and it doesn't do us justice at all as a people.
Yeah, I think that's what we hope to do with the film festival, so that we're just not looking at the bloodshed and the political turmoil, but actually understanding the different culture and knowing that there is a country that is far beyond what you're reading in the headline. But for now, let's go back to talking about what in Burmese language people refer to as Nui Utolanye, or the Burma Spring Revolution. So Gumsang, can I ask you to talk about how this Burma Spring Revolution relates to the Kachin people's long struggle for autonomy and self-determination? Is there a relationship? Are they two separate things?
Absolutely, because the underwriter of this violence and these atrocities and these oppression is the same institution that only legitimize our claim, and only prove to us that we see it as an event of affirmation that this military has no intention to have a peaceful Burma, that they usurp this power intentionally, and also a democratic Burma or federal Burma has no space for an genocidal regime like this. So it's a pure affirmation for 54 million people. We've been fighting with them since 1961. Karenni's been fighting this kind of sentiment since the birth of the nation. We see that our Burman counterparts, or the brothers and sisters, witnessed this first-handedly in a much wider scale, even beyond 1988. And I see with these great tragedy and sadness, I do see a silver lining as well, that Burma has never been this unified as a nation, because we have this undercurrent of tragedy. I do see Nui Utolanye as a realization for the entire nation, and a sense of awakening to all people, that silence during atrocities against the Kachins and or Karennis in 1990s, and against the Kachin in more forcefully in 2011, when we had a renewed civil war. These empowered them to wage a larger campaign against other ethnic minorities. So silence against Kachin civil war in 2011 empowered them to do a genocide against Rohingya in 2017. And we were all liable as a nation for silence against Rohingya, especially the Burman counterparts. And that empowered, that silence, I mean, it's a strategic silence, to be honest, by ruling government, strategic silence by them, empowered this military to stage a coup. If the world was silent on killing tens and thousands of people, throwing them in bonfire and raping them continuously and pillaging homes and burning of homes, then they doubled down on the fact that the world would be silent when they overthrow a government and I guess steal an election through violence.
Right. Because it gives them the idea that they can get away with it. How much they can get away with it. Yeah, good. Yasmin, I want to share I want to show a picture to you. One moment. Let me launch this picture here. Okay. Okay, so this is a Twitter feed from Rohingya activist Wei Wei Nu saying that, look at this, in the Nui U Tolan Ye, actually the Rohingya youth, the Gen Z of the Rohingya youths are actually part of it. So could you talk about how Nui U Tolan Ye relates to the Rohingya people's struggle, and how are they related? And how do you feel you should respond to Nui U Tolan Ye?
First, this is not the first time that Rohingya have actually involved or participated in the call or in the strikes or in the pursuit for revolution, for the justice and for peace within the country. In the 88 generation, a huge number of Rohingya actually participated in that, and there is no amount of there's no amount of reiteration that I can actually do in order to capture how much work we've been trying to do over the past few years, even when we didn't have the support of the Myanmar general public. Our calls were the same exact things that we're calling for the international community to do today, be it about ASEAN, be it about disempowering the military institution by cutting their lifeline, disengaging with them, cutting their business ties with the MEHL, MEC, and MOGE, and freezing their assets within foreign, investment or foreign banks. All of this have been continuously advocated for over the past few years, alongside the call for Rohingya to be reintegrated back into the Myanmar society, for us to be supported when we are working to build alliances within the country, because that is the only way that we could see the future forward. And the Spring Revolution is exactly that. It's the embodiment of how alliance and the strength of that alliance is so important in moving this country forward, without understanding that not only do we have a common enemy, but this very common enemy is looking to disempower everybody at the end, and looking to actually dispossess and take from us as much as it can in order to keep the status quo strong against the rest of the country. So I think the Spring Revolution had brought us the new understanding, or at least a glimpse of what it's like to be a Rohingya, or what it's like to be a Kachin, what it's like to be ethnic minorities, having all of these different elements of oppression weighing down on them every single day, and not being able to move forward, not having the social mobility that other, say a Burma person would have, or a person who's adjacent to power would have. And all of this kind of brought an understanding that perhaps and hopefully we can actually continue to push forward and continue to use as a leverage in order for more intersectional understanding to emerge. And that is, there are no one level of suppression or oppression across the country. And, for Kachin people, it is, even though there are similarities that we can draw between all of the ethnic communities, for Kachin person, it might be different in specific area of the Kachin state, and others, very differently in various different areas. And so bringing all of that to the table might sound complicated and complex to do, but I think the first thing that we have learned all throughout this whole entire 4 months of having to resist in and outside of the country in order to make sure that the Tatmadaw is eventually pushed out, is that we need to do more active listening, and those things will, eventually fuel us forward in order to have a fully working federal democracy. So for Rohingya, it is an opportunity. As terrible as it is, I do not want anybody to have to go through what Rohingya have gone through. I would not wish that on my worst enemy, and it is an existence that is constantly being questioned, an existence that is constantly being erased off of the earth. A realization that, growing up, I have never had a strong sense of identity or a strong sense of self, because I was, first of all, in exile in Thailand. That Thailand is quite a racist society against Myanmar people, wherever you're from. And on top of that, having to understand what Rohingya even means, and actually practicing self-hate most of my life. Understanding all of those and coming to grasp with those things were extremely difficult and exhausting. And I was not alone. And many Rohingya young people to this day are asking or reaching out to me and asking, how do I get involved? I didn't really want to be a Rohingya at first, but I guess this is how things are now, and I want to be involved. And I think there's so much more that we could do to support young people and helping them, because they were cut from their roots. And that is a very, very traumatic thing to have to go through, apart from, all of the things that our parents or grandparents' generation have had to witness, and the people in the camps who left in 2017 have had to witness. So all of these elements really brought us to one point in, 1st of February of this coup. How do we ensure that not only do we reintegrate Rohingya back into the Myanmar society, but we reconnect those dots that have been cut and that have been erased by the military? How do we, re-engage the Myanmar society with the understanding that Rohingya were actually, and have been, a crucial part of what this country has been about? And there's a lot more in common that we have than there is difference.
Gumsan, you earlier talked about a strategic silence. I can understand why, if you are a politician, it probably doesn't benefit you to speak up for persecuted minorities. But is it fair to say that also among average Burma people in general, there is a reluctance to speak up for the Kachin people, for the Dainda people, when there are terrible things happening to your villages and your region, or certainly for the Rohingya people? Do you think you can help us understand why even the people who are not politicians, average people, do you think you can help us understand why some of these people don't want to speak up?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, Burma is a very communal society, right? So it's like sometimes it's scorn from the society could be one of it, but I would see to be the historical narrative itself, right? What they're able to do is they're able to manipulate history, right? They're able to manipulate history to the extent where whoever founded this union was principally a few Burman that, Burman king overruled entire Burma. Like those false narratives are ingrained in Burmese society. It's like I was born with a very wrong of history. I thought the 30 comrades liberated Burma to be true, which is absolutely farce, right? We know that if you really genuinely understand the history. We thought that, Aung San single-handedly took over the British and set the independence agenda by himself, which is absolutely false as well. So these false narratives are repeatedly told by generations, from generations to generations, and they're able to manipulate this, right? So like, for example, the armed forces of the country, as if, it's a legacy of Jansita and Bernau, right? Burman kings, which is absolutely false as well. These aren't legacy of any of the Burman kings. These are actually the legacy of the English forces, or the first commander-in-chief of the nation was not a Burman, it was a Karen. And there were various composition. There were I was doing the research, there's 22% Indian in the first Burman forces. There were 23% Karens, over 30% Karens, 23% Kachins. There were Muslims in the founding of the nation. These false narrative empowers a false notions, amplify their false notions as well. So in terms of the empathy toward other so-called the minorities or other people, I think it's because they empower this martial race theory that, they are beholden to be the custodian of this union or this country, that that sort of sense of false narrative makes them to be less empathetic to the cause of other people. So when we're talking about, when I was talking about the Kachin, I forgot to mention, for example, OSS 101, over 10,000, these are the legacy, like OSS 101 or the OSS Office of Strategic Services. The legacy force of this is current day CIA and Green Beret. They were tested in Assam and Northern Burma. So like to that extent, it has relevancy to the world history, right? So in that, even those very important history were all erased from the understanding from the greater Burman society. So these deliberate erasion of history only empowers this false ethnocentrism of the country. If they have forgotten about the Kachin people to that extent, I can empathize the Rohingya people. That's to be frank. Thank you.
By the way, one of the audience members is curious about your earlier comments that the Kachin people have some commonality with Tibet. Would you want to clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, so we're Tibeto-Burman. Our forefathers have traded very closely to Tibet, India. We live in snow-capped mountains. Some of our names have very common, we have common names. If you just mumble Tibetan speech, you might as well mistaken with Kachin.
I see. Okay. All right. Good. Yasmin, soon after the coup, I see particularly among the young people who are posting on social media, they were almost apologetic in saying we were sorry about not speaking up earlier for the Rohingya people and what the military had done to them in the clearance operations and things like that. Have you seen any of them? Am I just seeing them as isolated case, or is that a trend that is noticeable to you, and how do you feel about that?
I think I don't think that it is a mere trend that sprung out of this resistance movement. I think it should be connected to the groundwork that many human rights defenders and the civil society groups within Myanmar have been laying and doing those kind of works. Many of my colleagues have already been doing a lot of these works, and they were met with a lot of not only backlash, but threats and many different sort of social punishments back in the days prior to this coup, when people started to get a glimpse of what the ethnic minorities within the country could possibly have had to go through. Now, the work that they've done was to actually bring Myanmar into a realization that we cannot really survive with people at the top engaging in annihilation of a group of people, or dispossessing the land, or engaging in any sort of injustices across the country, and remain, you know, moral or ethical in their power. And there's a lot of this, like our brother have said, the ideology of the military was built on the exceptionalism, or you know, that the military can only do the right things, and they're patriotic in a way, and it is tied with a beautiful religion, Buddhism, to validate and justify their you know, basically their concerns, or their basically strategies in dispossessing, in causing harms to various different ethnic communities. And for Rohingya, it was about, you know, a war on terror, which is a very, very crucial and a global trend across the globe, that is supported by the U.S. Waging wars against terror in the Middle East and other parts of the world. So all of this is when we let impunity happen once, or when we let impunity take place within the country, it's only certain that it's bound to happen again and again and again, unless we actually stop the cycle. And that means that people need to start engaging in a more critical thinking analysis, and critical thinking you know, in various different ways, and understanding that yes, their lives might, they might be surrounded by certain things, and it's presented as facts, but that's not necessarily all true. And we live in a society, especially in Myanmar, Burma, in a very, very curated society where we're pit against one another, and we're constantly, you know, in an almost like arms race, in order to basically say that I am, you know, in some parts of this this whole discussion on Twitter, was that, you know what, let's not hear about the ethnic concerns right now. It's you know, let's leave it for when we actually have federal democracy. But that thought process is the exact same with the silencing of Rohingya or Kachin or Karenni's concerns prior to the coup, where they're like, you know what, we can't really handle this right now. Let the government actually deal with it. And we don't really know facts. We don't really know how, you know, what things are going on. And that's the disconnection that has been sown so deep within Myanmar society, across the country, in order to actually disempower us as a whole. And so what is really powerful about this whole movement since the coup started is that there is the remnants of that connection coming back, and there is a constant and active attempts to actually reconnecting and re-engaging with one another, you know, across the nation. And what is so interesting about the apologies are that they're all almost made by young people and not really older generations. And there's something to say, you know, something to be said about that, because 70% of Myanmar right now, 70% of the people who live in Myanmar right now have not actually witnessed the 88 generation. And they were not part of that at all. So most of the country right now are young people. And I am not going to go into how I think they're sincere or not, because that's really not my place. But I take it as a cue, as a really good start for us to start listening, for us to actually start the reconciliation process that is long overdue within the country for all of the ethnic communities who have gone through war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So the apologies, as heartening as it has been, I think not only has it been a good start, but we need to push further for it to actually become a tool for us to leverage and try to get people to listen a little bit more and not just brush off the ethnic concerns as something, you know, inconveniencing the movement or something that's dragging the process. Because let's face it, nothing is going to happen unless we actually comes to terms with the historical past of how racist our country has been, how discriminatory our country has been, and understanding and coming to a reckoning as a unified nation is accepting and admitting that we were wrong, and analyzing what elements of those wrongs were caused by us contributing to you know, the culture of silencing or the culture of impunity, and fixing those elements, fixing those factors would be the one way to actually move the country toward a more pluralistic and multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religions country. And I think I might have already explained some of that to one of the questions.
You may have already answered one of the questions that were posted, I imagine, but keep thinking about that, because if we have some time, I'd like you to expand on what you just talked about. For now, Gumsan, let me show you this image, and it is also a form of apology. In Burmese script, it says, I apologize, and essentially the text says, ever since February 1st, we started to see how cruel the military could be. And we now understand what our ethnic brothers and sisters have gone through. So I can sympathize with them better. I'm paraphrasing in a really simplified fashion, but have you seen things like that, Gumsan? And when you see this, how does it make you feel?
Okay, so I've seen this, and unfortunately, it harkens me to saffron as well. So we were protesting for saffron, and at my young age, I participated in 1988. So during saffron, our democratic Burman counterparts, brother and sisters, also asked for federalism at that time as well, in 2007, 2008. And they said, we have a common enemy, we have common enemy, and then this is our priority. After we topple this, our country will be, will be great again. Very utopian kind of thinking. But now, we see this this scene plays out again. But this time is slightly different than we experienced in the past, because we have a backdrop of social media and the power of social media, and also information that's definitely different from previous generations. And this new generation is different because unlike even my generation, they had enjoyed a sense of some quasi-hybrid democracy, right? Democracy that cohabitates with authoritarianism. So at least they have some sort of democracy. They have known, they have engaged with the world as well. So I believe there's greater sincerity in their apology this time than back in 2007. To certain degrees, we have to give, we have to welcome this this sense of sympathy or empathy. So this sympathetic gesture from our brothers and sisters from our Burman community.
Yasmin, let's talk about the National Unity Government. The National Unity Government, of course, is the offshoot of the CRPH, which is the offshoot of the lawmakers and the parliamentarians elected in the 2020 national election. The NUG government recently published its policy on the Rohingya people and their path to citizenship, if you will. What do you think about that?
I think it is a very good first step. I know that there are various different language within the statement, especially about accountability and international justice that should be welcomed. There are also a lot of involvement and engagement. So we don't really see in the public that Rohingya are trying to do and advocate for directly with the NUG. So keeping that in mind, while understanding and deciphering all of these different statements that have come about in regards to Rohingya is important. So I'm not saying that the one mere statement is actually going to fix all of the problems of historical injustices that have happened to Rohingya, but it anything that we want to address about our historical past and trying to righting the wrong, it would have to start with an acknowledgement. And I think that this was a really, really good embodiment of that. However, there are certain parts of the statements, for example, about the Rakhine Commission, the Kofi Annan Rakhine Commission document that I do not think would be helpful, or that it would not be as helpful as actually engaging directly with the Rohingya community. And I know that the NUG is quite limited in its resources and its access to the people, but it doesn't have to, the current plans doesn't have to be a rigid one. It can change, it can morph to fit the understanding and fit the community's need a little bit better in the future. Certainly the acknowledgement that a genocide did take place was a really, really important one. And I think there is a lot of power in previous NLD representatives who were in denial or who were silencing people who raised concerns about Rohingya, who have to now come to terms with the understanding or the stance, political stance that the NUG as a whole has put out. There is obviously going to be more there's obviously more need to engage with these different individuals directly and indirectly through the resistance movement and pressuring them to actually represent the will of the people better. But there is a power in us being acknowledged as a group of people who actually belong to Myanmar, because we've never gotten that. It was always, you're an immigrant, you've never been here. But for me, my grandparents' generation cannot even tell us how long their families traces back within Rakhine State, and where could we have come from if we were not from here from the get-go. And all of that sort of is combined into this one single statement that acknowledges our presence and our existence within this country. There are other issues that we can explore later on, but I think the acknowledgement was the most important, and the understanding that there is no acceptance anymore in the democratically elected government to actually compromise with the military, and that compromise will never work in the future, hopefully, by the current resistance movement being so coming to terms with and understanding more about the oppression of ethnic communities as a whole by the Tatmadaw and how harmful the Tatmadaw as an institution is. So all of this kind of brought together, I think, hopefully it would bring together the new wave of awakening and reckoning within the country, that we cannot coexist with an oppressive regime, we cannot coexist with a power-hungry dictator, and that we would do everything possible for us to not be for us to not end up here again in the future.
We've been addressing the audience questions as we go along, but audience, as you're watching, if you have thoughts, comments, or questions for the panelists, feel free to type them in and we'll try to, I will raise these points and the panelists can address them with you. Gumsan, when you look at the national unity government, certainly as a political strategy, they have retained, for example, Aung San Suu Kyi as a state councillor and President Win Myint as the president again. But they also now have a prime minister who is Mang Wen Kai Than, who is an ethnic Karen and a Christian, I believe. And also they also have Dua Lashila, who is an ethnic Kachin like you, who is named vice president of the National Unity Government. So when you look at that sort of appointment, does it feel like this is the kind of government that can lead the country into a federal democracy, more diverse? How do you feel about it?
It's a great question. So Dua Lashila is in KPIC with me. I serve as a secretary, and he previously served as a president, a chairperson of our coordination team. So we extensively for decision to join the NUG because it was absolutely challenging for us to decide as well. But the premise that we're coming from is we were not treated cordially. We were not treated, fairly by NLD during its reign as well. If this, tit for tat, or I'm glad that you're hurting right now, that sort of mentality will not drive this nation forward. So because it's a zero-sum game and it's a race to the bottom, that sort of sentiment. So what we feel was to engage in our best capacity and to capitalize the nation's unity that never had experienced this sort of unity, and to capitalize for the better of the nation. So when we initially engaged with CRPH, we were predicated on a few policies issue. One was to abolish 2008 Constitution, that we will not, that should be the fundamental basis for us to engage with CRPH. Because at that time, CRPH also was contending with 2008 Constitution. But from the get-go, we said this will not, will not fare well with our public 2008 Constitution. Second is to charter a federalism that was promised to us in 1947 to all of us, actually for the entire nation. And the third most important thing is to have a sovereignty that derived from the people, the will of the people, right? So under that, CRPH agreed to those principles, and we began engagement. And that's why 4 of our team members in KPIC joined the NUG government. Yes, there's still deficiency that we witness, but something that is obviously very different is that they're willing to engage with all parties, that we all have a sense that if we stick together, we have a fighting chance to stop these atrocities for once and for all. And that's the principal reason why Kachins are committed to the NUG process.
There is a movie that is in the film lined up for this festival, and I found out that you are actually quite familiar with the topic of this movie, and it's Mother, Daughter, Sister. It is directed by Jeannie Marie Halassi, and that's actually one of the short documentaries that talks about the military's impunity and its use of sexual violence as a weapon to terrorize ethnic communities. Do you have anything you can say to help us better understand, maybe if people are thinking about watching this movie, is there anything you can say about the case, particularly of the 2 Kachin school teachers who were murdered and whose case remained open until people pushed for persecution and investigation Anything else you can say to help people better appreciate this movie or give us more insight about this movie?
So this movie in this case projects a very clear picture of Burma during so-called democratic transition, right? So it shows a cohabitation of a ruthless army with a Democratic Party that's trying to hold some power. So in this case especially, this was a brutal rape and murder case of two volunteer teachers, right? Volunteer Christian teachers. Volunteered because there's no government access to these regions. I mean, it's just so remote that nobody is willing to go to educate these villages. And these two individuals, especially one of them, is IDP herself. She's a displaced person herself, but she volunteered to teach at this very remote village in northern Shan state. So the military, I think one of the battalion that was stationed around there, it was a mobile troop. They stationed less than 100 yards away from the church estate. So these two young teachers stay and live in the church compound, and they have these troops that just moved in the previous day, and the rape and murder happened. And as soon as that happened, those troops were moved away, or they actually disappeared from that village that very morning after the case happened. So the most tragic part was when this happened, that even the NLD government were not able to even send a very simple condolence letter. So it projects a clear image of the precarious situation in Burma, where the army has impunity and the ruling party or the government had to stay silent. So it's a good synopsis of the situation in Burma in those days.
I'm going to give each of you a chance to do closing remarks, but before I do that, I just want to mention that there is another live speaker panel coming up, and that is Myanmar military's exploitation of natural resources. That is going to be June 8th. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and that'll be moderated by Jeannie Marie Hallisey, who actually directed that movie that we were just discussing. So now I would like to give each of you a chance to do closing remarks. I'm going to start with you, Yasmin. Is there anything you'd like to say to other ethnic brothers and sisters, or to your Rohingya brothers and sisters? Feel free to do it in English and in your mother tongue as well. I'll give you maybe about 2 minutes.
I don't have really much to say in the end. I just want to extend my hand to my ethnic brothers and sisters who've had to go through this, who've had to have so many exhausting conversations, who've had to face so much backlash just to try to raise concerns and raise awareness about their version of oppression and their truth. And all that I can say is that I feel you, I hear you, and I truly, truly hope that this is going to be a chance for us all to reconnect and rerouting ourselves back to each other, to one another, because our history is not in isolation, be it oppression or not, and that is the power that we have, not just within our suffering, but within the strength and resilience that we have had to hold on to in order to survive for this long. And ethnic arms groups are incredible embodiment of those very things. But it is also the very, those lay people that that live and breathe every single day, even though they don't, they don't have arms, they don't have any weapons to protect themselves, but they continue to live, continue to survive. And the very existence of ourselves throughout this entire oppression and oppressive history is the epitome of how resilient and how strong we are as a people. And I think harnessing that, moving forward and trying to understand each other from that very perspective would be extremely important. And I hope for the best. I hope that we will actually turn this country around into a very, very pluralistic and very accepting and understanding as a nation, and that we would set an example, not just for the ASEAN, for the regional entities, but for the world to actually see that there is a possibility when we put our minds to it, that we can create a more federalistic and pluralistic society, and hopefully that we never end up here ever again. Thank you.
Very good. By the way, I should correct the time for the next speaker panel, and that's actually, the date is right, June 8th. However, it is going to be at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, not 6 p.m. My apologies. Now, Gunsang, your turn. Anything you'd like to say to your brothers and sisters or to the protesters in Nui Utolanye? Your message, you feel free to do it in English and in your mother tongue if you'd like to.
Yeah, so yeah, I will reiterate what Yasmin just had stated earlier. This is our fighting chance. This is once in a generation. Actually, since there's no time in Burmese history that we've seen this sort of unity since Independence Day. We came from very different background. We were fighting in a different side of World War II. I mean, during independence, we're on different sides. We are in a different spectrum when it comes to religion. But the most important thing is our forefathers chose to be established as one family. Our forefathers chose this road of unity, and we should honor those principles that they have charted out. And this is I see this hardship as a crucible of hope. It's extremely hard, but there's hope to it, and then there's the light at the end of the tunnel. It's every great things demands a great investment, and this is an investment that everyone has paid. Especially our Korean brother and sister, they have seen this suffering for 7 generations, and our Kachins as well. Since 1961, we've seen these horror, and now we don't wish upon any other more people to see suffering, but we believe that everyone has been, eyes have been opened, and this is the best time that we capitalize on it. And I encourage everybody, and also not only our people, but also across the world, to see Burma as this, not just a coup, somebody staged a coup, but as a country that has suffered war since the founding in 1947, 1948. So please help us, and every Gen Zs out there, please keep on fighting, and we're behind you, and we'll support our best capacity.
Very good.
Close in English.
Very good. Thank you so much. By the way, I have to recorrect the time that I just announced, because I just got a message that says that my original announcement was correct. So tomorrow's speaker panel is actually 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So, all right, I'd like to thank my panelists San Nsang and Yasmin Ullah for joining me and sharing their thoughts and talking about the complicated history of the the fabric of ethnic makeup in Myanmar, and I join them in wishing that the country will have a peaceful resolution, and we will see a truly democratic federal union. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm Kenneth Wong. If you are watching film, we hope that you'll be inspired to make a generous donation so that we can keep supporting the people who are on the ground, participating in the peaceful resistance against this military junta. Thank you, and we are out.